Hello, and welcome to Principles of Macroeconomics. This is Module 4.1e, and in this module, we're going to start talking about the money supply, money demand model, and the money market equilibrium. To start off with, we first need to discuss the relationship between the price level and the value of money. So when we see an increase in the price level, what does this tell us about the value of money? Well, when prices start to rise, that means that each dollar that you have in your pocket buys you less of a specific good. So the value of each dollar starts to decline. At higher price levels, the value of money is low. On the other hand, at lower price levels, the same money that you have in your pocket is able to buy you more goods and services. So the value of money rises. We see that we have an inverse relationship between the price level and the value of money. This is going to be important to keep in mind when we start talking about the money supply, money demand model. Okay, so money supply, money demand. We've already talked over the course of the last few videos about money supply. Remember, money supply is determined by the Federal Reserve, or the central bank of an economy. They're the ones that are going to fix the quantity of money in the economy. So we're going to assume that money supply is a vertical line, and it is going to be a fixed amount unless the Federal Reserve or the central bank changes it. On the other hand, money demand is going to reflect the liquidity preferences of households. If people prefer to hold more money or more wealth in liquid form, money demand is going to be high. If, on the other hand, they prefer to hold less of their wealth in liquid form, money demand is going to be low. So if we bring together our money supply and money demand curves, they're going to look like this graph. You'll see a vertical money supply and a downward sloping money demand. Now, it's important to note that in this model, we have two axes on either side of our graph. The x-axis is still the quantity or the quantity of money. On the y-axis, we have the value of money, or 1 over the price level. As a reference, we also are going to include the price level on what we can call the z-axis. Now, it's important to note here, for a reference point, we're going to label the axes for the y-axis from high to low. The value of money is going from high to low, and for the z-axis from low to high. Now, why do we do this? Well, we think about our economy in terms of the price level. We don't necessarily think about it naturally in the terms of the value of money. So we use our z-axis or the price level as a reference point once we start seeing changes in the money supply and money demand graph. Remember, in economics, the more labels that you put on your graph, the easier it's going to be for you to interpret and analyze what is happening in the model. So try to include these labels to help you interpret the model when you're doing it on your own. Okay, so let's talk about changes in the money supply. Let's suppose that the Federal Reserve decides to increase the money supply. In our market, the money demand and money supply model, what does this tell us? Okay, well, let's start off with our equilibrium. When we increase the money supply, when the Federal Reserve decides to conduct expansionary monetary policy, we're going to see a shift out or to the right of the money supply. The result, therefore, is that temporarily we see that money demand is going to be less than money supply at the prevailing price level, P1. This tells us that when we have a shift in the money supply, temporarily we have a surplus of money. Therefore, what we need to see is that prices and the price level have to rise. We're going to talk about exactly how this happens. So, to alleviate the surplus of money, what do people do? The Federal Reserve increases the money supply. One of the ways that they do this is that they buy bonds from people. Remember, this is called open market operations. When they buy bonds from the public, they give them money in exchange for those bonds. So now, people that previously were holding on to bonds are holding on to money instead. What do they do with that money? Well, the first thing that they can do is that they can go out and buy goods or services. When they go out and buy goods or services, that increases the demand in the market for goods and services, thereby pushing up the price level overall in the economy. Because the demand for goods and services increases, the prices of goods and services as a result increase. On the other hand, the other option is that people take that money that they received from the Federal Reserve and they put it into interest-bearing assets. What happens then? Well, the supply of loanable funds increases. That money can be considered excess funds. They put it in an interest-bearing tool, increase the savings curve, increase the supply of loanable funds. And this results in a decrease in the interest rate and an increase in the quantity of loanable funds. As the quantity of loanable funds increases, this is signaling that loans are cheaper because interest rates have fallen and investment spending has increased. Remember, why do we take out loans? We take out loans specifically to buy goods or services. So if investment spending is increasing, the demand for capital goods and services is increasing and prices are rising. So in both cases, as people try to cope with the surplus of money and either buy more goods and services or put that money into interest-bearing tools, both scenarios are going to lead to an increase in demand and therefore an increase in prices overall in the economy. That's why when we see an increase in the money supply, we're going to see an increase in the price level and therefore inflation. So let's work through an example here so that we can look at what happens when you have changes in money demand and changes in money supply. So let's consider a scenario where credit cards become more readily available in our economy. People, therefore, don't need to hold quite as much money in their pockets to pay for the same goods or services. Let's analyze what kind of impact that has on our money demand and money supply model. Here again, you can pause the video, try to work through the example yourself, and then come back and join me for the explanation. Okay, so credit cards become more readily available. People don't need to hold quite as much cash in their pockets or in their checking accounts to be able to make the same purchases. So this tells us that money demand declines. People don't need to hold on to quite as much money as they did before in liquid form. Money demand falls, but remember, the quantity of money stays the same in our economy because the Federal Reserve is the one that determines the quantity of money. So as money demand falls, we end up at P1 with a surplus of money, which we just talked about, right? So with that surplus of money, we are going to see an increase in prices. As prices adjust, we move down to our new equilibrium point, point B. We have a higher price level and a lower value of money. So in response to the credit cards being more readily available, money demand falls, the price level rises, and the value of money falls. Now, this could be disconcerting to the Federal Reserve or the central bank in an economy because rising price levels indicate inflation. So what if the Federal Reserve or the central bank wants to keep the price level constant and control inflation? How can it respond to this change in money demand? Well, to be able to keep the price level constant, or to lower inflation or control inflation, they need to try to get back to the original price level, P1. To be able to do this, we need to look at the new money demand, MD2, and find a point where our money supply will cross money demand at P1. To do this, we'll have a shift in of the money supply. The money supply declines so that we reach a new equilibrium point with a lower quantity of money, a new money demand, and the existing price level at P1. So what we see here is that the Federal Reserve is able to respond to changes in money demand, respond to changes in the money market to control for inflation. The Federal Reserve will adjust the money supply, either increase it or decrease it to reach its targets. So what have we learned in this segment? Well, we've learned about money supply and money demand and the money market equilibrium. We've seen how changes in money supply can affect the price level and the value of money, and we've seen how changes in money demand can do the same. We've also learned about how the Federal Reserve can respond to changes in the money market to control for inflation. Thanks so much for joining me in Module 4.1E, the changes in money supply and changes in money demand.